Robert Koerner is a political and economic commentator for the Huffington Post, Truth in Media, the Daily Paul, and other sites. 2012, his Blue Republican article went viral and launched a movement focused on winning supporters for liberty rather than winning arguments, and finding common ground with those of various political persuasions. In that spirit, Robert trains activists and candidates to become good salespersons for liberty. Robin, a British permanent resident of the USA, also founded WatchingAmerica.com, an organization of over 300 volunteers that translates and posts in English views about the USA from all over the world. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Robin Koerner.
Thank you. It's good to be with you all. And thanks for mentioning that article that went viral in 2011, actually. I think I'll start there since you mentioned it and it speaks to what I want to talk about. I don't know, I guess most of your listeners, your viewers don't know this, but the numerically largest coalition of voters for Ron Paul in 2012 was actually the Blue Republicans. Blue Republican being a name that I coined, an expression I coined for people who were reading my articles on the Huffington Post. So of course, they're liberal folks, progressive folks, certainly formerly Obama supporting folks, who changed parties to put Ron Paul on the Republican ticket. And the reason this article went viral and the reason that the campaign determined that the largest coalition of support self-identified for Ron Paul was actually, born of a leftist media organization was because of some of the things I want to talk to you about today. I'm in the business of, as you also said, winning supporters, not arguments. Most people, when they're doing politics, they're trying to win arguments. And that's a very different thing from winning supporters. And indeed, many people who share broadly my political views, more kind of libertarian types, they actually, in the pursuit of winning arguments, they almost guarantee they're going to lose the supporter. Now, there's a few little principles, little packets I want you to take away, because I don't have long, and usually I would be discussing this over an hour or two. But the first is that judgment and justification are different processes. When we're engaged in political debates, we're usually throwing back and forth justifications. These are rationalizations of positions, but nobody gets to their positions rationally. Even though we think we do get to our positions rationally, we don't. The changing of a mind or the making of a decision is always an essentially emotional thing that is done. And you can actually test this. You can put a person in an fMRI brain scan and you can see the synapses that are active when in the act of persuasion, or even in the act of a decision to buy a product. This is something that salesmen know very well. The synapses that are active at the point of persuasion, of changing mind, of even being open to being persuaded, are very different from the ones that are firing when we're explaining our views to somebody else. And indeed, we tend to believe that our reasons for our views really are our reasons, but they are not cognitively how we get there. Now, if we're a political activist, we need to know that. We need to understand, like salesmen do, that all sales are made emotionally, however they're rationalized afterwards. And this Goethe, the German Shakespeare, as I like to call him, had a really deep sense of this. He actually said, you see only what you know. Not you know what you see what you know. Now, there was an experiment that was done in the late 40s in Harvard called the Perceptions of Incongruity experiment, where people were flashed playing cards and asked to call out what card they saw. 3 of hearts, 7 of spades, etc. And what the scientists did, they were showing them at high speed, and they would insert cards where the red and black colors were switched. So there'd be a 3 of hearts, but it would be black, not red, for example, right? You get the idea. So when people see that, what do they actually say? Do they say, oh, that's not a real card, that's a black 3 of hearts? No, they don't. They either say 3 of hearts, or they say 3 of spades or 3 of clubs. In other words, not just their interpretation of what they're seeing is determined by what they already believe, but their very immediate perception is actually determined by what they believe. Now, in politics, it works the same way, and it works the same way very deeply and in a very complex fashion. What we believe is broadly determined by, we might say, our political identity. And we all know this, right? We all know that there's great political tribalism. People have been stuck in brain scanners, Democrats and Republicans, and were asked to listen to, a guy called Weston did this experiment, 30 male Democrats, 30 male Republicans, and they had to listen to their favorite candidate, presidential candidate, this was Bush and Kerry, contradict themselves. So this is a very interesting experiment, because when you hear people do this, in each case, what they're hearing is a logical equivalent of 2 + 2 = 5. Right? And we're seeing what happens in their brain when they hear that statement from somebody that they are well disposed towards by virtue of their political position, or not well disposed towards. It's really interesting to see what we see in the brain. What goes on is a process of resolving of cognitive dissonance. The first thing we see is a sense of conflict, and there are different centers of the brain that handle conflict. We see a lot of activity in the emotional centers of the brain. What is going on is that the people who are hearing their man contradict themselves are looking for a way to explain this away. And what you see is, unsurprisingly, all the Republicans explain away Bush contradicting himself, and all the Democrats explain away Kerry contradicting himself, but not the opposite. So the actual processing of the information, the actual logic is out of the window. The prefrontal cortex is not active. The bit that handles mathematics and logic, it's not active. And when you can, by virtue of these emotional processes in the brain, maintain your own position, maintain the position that you went into the situation with, you get a huge dopamine hit, right? We're actually hardwired to see the world, this is to Goethe's point, to see the world in such a way that it reinforces our belief. So, why all this kind of academic-y, sciencey background? What it means is your Facebook arguments are a complete waste of time. What it means is going toe-to-toe with facts and logic is generally not the way that you're going to change anyone's mind. Because if somebody starts by disagreeing with you, then they are subconsciously disposed to approach everything that you say to them through this question: do I have to believe this? Now, what you want to do if you're a political activist and if you're engaged in the art of political persuasion, is you need to give the person an experience of you that causes them not to ask themselves whether they have to believe you, but can they believe you, right? If somebody identifies with you, which means they can essentially trust your motivations, they can essentially imagine what it feels like to experience the world like you do, then they're not filtering everything you say to find fault. They're letting it come in. It feels safe to them. So our job, if we're activists who are involved in political persuasion, is to cause people to do that. And that's essentially an empathic effort, not a logical one or a rational one. Because here's the thing: nobody cares what you think. Nobody essentially cares about what anybody else thinks. Everybody cares about what they think. Now, I'm going to say something that's so obvious. So did you get the distinction there? Everyone cares about what they themselves think, not what anybody else thinks. So if you're going to get someone to want to listen to you, it has to be because you're serving them something, not forcing something on them. You're actually helping them clarify what they already believe. They feel that they're doing something with you which is basically collaborative rather than confrontational. So the first thing you don't want to do if you're engaged in political persuasion is make somebody feel wrong. We do this in politics all the time, right? We try, if we're liberal, to explain to our conservative friends why they're wrong. And if we're conservative, we try to explain to our liberal friends why they're wrong. But they're already seeing that this is coming from a paradigm in which they don't participate. And this is easy. We can give an easy example here. Left versus right in politics. This is shorthand, but we use left versus right all the time. Now, if you are of the left, you're essentially engaged in the politics of good intention. If you are of the right, you actually don't have the same fundamental assumptions about the effectiveness of government and of law that perhaps your folks on the left do. So you have probably seen this happen. Have you noticed that the people on the left think that your friends on the right are essentially bad, but the people on the right think that your friends on the left are essentially what? Bad or stupid? Usually stupid. Because what they're doing is trying to understand the other from where they sit. So if I'm a liberal and I am choosing policy or supporting policy because in a way that rests on an assumption that policy can directly manifest good intention, and if it does so, it's better policy, then if my policy, the things I support, comes from my good intention, if you are opposing me on policy, then you obviously, if I'm kind of looking at the logic of this from where I sit on the left, obviously there's something wrong with your intention. Now, if I'm on the right and I don't believe that you can actually manifest good intention and policy and get outcomes that reflect the intention, then I'm not going to believe that. I believe, perhaps, that I support policies because they work better, that functionally they work better, and that functionality, effectiveness, results has very little to do with the intention that goes into them. So if I believe I'm supporting a policy because I understand something, if somebody disagrees with me and supports an opposing policy, then obviously they don't understand it. So they're not bad, they're stupid. So you can see that people on the left and people on the right, they're doing different things. Our job always is to find the common ground. And how do you do that? Well, the easiest way to find common ground is to discuss, is to meet someone at shared experience. Not even shared opinion, but shared experience. As human beings, and again, I'm going to say something that I hope you think is obvious when I say it, but as human beings, we have so much more in common than divides us. We have all the same emotional dynamics. Whether you're on the left or the right, whether you support this issue or don't, you love your children. You fear the same things, whether you're an rich American, or a poor Baghdadi with bombs raining upon you. You love your children. You have the same essential sense of justice. I'm jumping around a lot here because I don't have a lot of time. But I mentioned justice because conservatives and liberals, for example, exist in different moral universes. There's some great work that's been done on this, some great books on this, especially recently. But if you want to find common ground with someone, which you have to do to get them from must I believe this to can I believe this, start by finding the shared injustice. By the way, I've been asked a lot recently about why Sanders on the one hand and Trump on the other hand are doing so well in the presidential races. It's because they're doing this. And you might say they're doing this, especially in the case of Trump, in a very crude way, but they're doing it, right? The support that Trump is getting, for example, it comes out of a resonance. The resonance is with, here's a guy talking about let's say, remember he started with immigration. There's this issue, immigration, the way it's being handled, or the way it's not been handled for decades by the establishment, actually offends the sense of justice of many people, not mediated by a political ideology, but there's this sense that this is an important issue, it affects the lives of millions of Americans, and there's something unfair going on at that southern border. Bernie Sanders, he's talking about economic injustice. He put out a video recently it was the first 5.5 minutes were just facts, outrageous facts about economic distribution of wealth and income in this country. Just facts that speak to a sense of felt injustice that many people have, that is not mediated by political ideology, actually, right? Now, obviously, your political ideologies are going to cause you to have different views about the best way to handle issues of wealth distribution or income distribution. But the facts themselves, if you just say them, you speak to this felt injustice that so many Americans feel, the reaction is visceral. It's not mediated by political views. And so it puts people on side. It causes people to say, this guy is talking about something that nobody else is. This guy gets me. And this is another essential point I want you to take away. If we're in the business of political persuasion, we think what we need to do is say what we believe so clearly that the logic and the clarity is going to convince. No, as we've seen, that isn't what works. People will even essentially believe 2 + 2 = 5 if it comes from the person they're already well disposed to believe. Instead, what people like Trump and Sanders are doing, why they're effective insurgents, is they are telling people what they already feel. And that's what we need to do. The act of winning supporters is to reflect back to people where they're already at in a way that causes them to think, yeah, this person gets me in a world where no one else does. Now, I'm part of the liberty movement. Obviously, you've heard my support for Ron Paul. I would like to see the liberty movement people in civil rights doing this much more effectively. It's interesting because if, for example, you hear these outrageous facts about income distribution and wealth distribution from Bernie Sanders, if he's where you learn about them, then what he's really doing is indicating what he most cares about. So you're going to believe that he's going to be the guy with the best solutions. Now, this is a problem for free market folks like me, right? The left is talking about economic injustice. They're the only people really talking about it. So people are going to think the answers to that problem come from the left too. I'm a free market guy. I want us, the free market people, to be talking about economic injustice, because felt injustice unites people across cultures, across political ideologies. Experiments show, and I actually mean experiments in laboratories show, that people will pay a price. They will actually hurt themselves to put right felt injustice in their immediate communities. And they do that regardless of political disposition. So again, if I come and explain the injustice to you that you already feel, then I've got your attention. You're identifying with me. You're going to be disposed to say, can I believe what this guy says rather than must I believe what this guy says? And then you're going to come to me for the solutions. There's a wonderful quote about this by a Spanish philosopher. Excuse my Spanish. His name is Ortega y Gasset. And he said something like, show me what you talk about or what you care about, and I will show you who you are. It's another way of saying the same thing. It matters less what you say about an issue. Your motivations are identified by the issue that you care about. Where do you start? Now, here's an example. I talked about economic justice, so I'll just keep using it as an example. People on the free market side, kind of like me, a lot of libertarian folks, we might call ourselves capitalists. And we might say, I'm a capitalist, or I believe in capitalism because it reduces economic poverty, or it produces poverty. And that might be true. There's another statement that has the same factual content, which is, I'm for reducing poverty. And so I'm for free exchanges between individuals for mutual benefit that harm no one else. And that, I believe, is what capitalism is. Now, those two statements actually have the same factual content, but one is about capitalism and the other is about poverty, because I start on different ground. And really, everything that I'm about and everything I'm talking about here is the finding of common ground. If you're taking somebody on a journey, you have to start from where they are. It would be nice to start nearer the end because it's nearer the end, so there's less far to go. Or to start where you are because that's what you know and where you're comfortable. And again, if you've ever been involved in one of those Facebook debates, you've probably done it. It's a waste of time. Make friends. Realize that forming relationships, i.e. building empathy, i.e. getting people to be hearing you through a filter of, I can essentially trust this guy. I understand what it feels like to look at the world through the eyes of this guy. I can trust his motivations. You want to be there because then people are asking, can I believe you, not must I? I notice on my Skype timer that this is about 20 minutes. So do you want me to carry on, or should I I think I've put out a load of things there that you can come back at me at, ask me questions. I'm happy to do either.
Yeah, Robin, this is great presentation, great information, of course. Thank you so much for being here at AdCon 3. A question for you on what your presentation was. We've had some really good content today that is in line with what you were talking about. Earlier today, we had Amanda Catherine Roman on, for example, from Living Room Conversations, talking about the ways to find common ground. One of the things I've noticed across this, and maybe you could talk a little bit more about this for us, is how passion is used proactively in creating a coalition to find common ground as opposed to destructively. So when you say, what would constructive and destructive look like? What do you mean by the destructive use of passion? Well, a lot of the times you were mentioning, as well as the way you are approaching someone with the subject matter, how you are voicing. There's a lot of greatly divisive issues. Some of them are more so than others. Take, for example, the abortion issue, pro-choice, pro-life. and that argument, and
Okay.
recent discussions about defunding Planned Parenthood. That has been a very polarizing issue in our society, but there is common ground there from many movements. So and it's very passionate
Right.
from both sides. So how do you feel is
Okay.
a good way to use it constructively, your passions on that issue?
I'm glad you brought up that example, because one of maybe the best speech I've ever given was actually to a room of religious conservatives. And I was the only pro-choice person in the room as far as I knew, and it was a speech about abortion. And actually, it was a speech, because I was in a room of religious conservatives, it was really a speech about telling the truth in love, which is a line from the Bible. I was quoting a Bible verse about how we're called not just to tell the truth. And there's a lot of self-righteousness all over the political spectrum, but especially on the Christian right, but to tell the truth in love. And that's about humility. Really, it's a verse about humility. I urge, because of exactly the example you've given me, I would urge anyone to go to Google, stick in my name, RLC Washington State, and that will come up on YouTube, and you'll see what I mean. One of the important things here is that we need to offer direction for change, not destinations, right? You see, the problem with the abortion issue, like so many issues, is we take positions, specific positions, that are far removed from those we're speaking with. And so those people they're starting disagreeing with us. So they are, I use the must I believe versus can I believe. Or even subconsciously, not even conscious, what they're trying to do is to find one thing in your position that they can't abide. Or maybe one inconsistency as they see it in your position. So don't go for specific positions, because that will always invite the attack, right? What you want is to discuss directions. Now, for example, whether you are pro-choice or pro-life, I'm guessing you want fewer abortions across society rather than more. Whether you are pro-choice or pro-life, you would probably like abortions to happen earlier rather than later. Whether you are pro-choice or pro-life, you there's a discussion to be had about what would you want to do with women who were, let's say, if you're pro-life, responsible for murder, if you see it that way. Do you want to incarcerate them? That's not a discussion you often hear, but the reason that's interesting is because people on opposite sides of that issue could come together over that question. You could actually be having a discussion about incarcerating people, and you're off the ground, you're off the oppositional ground. You've turned what could be confrontation into collaboration. You're working together towards a solution. Let me maybe explain it better by using a quote by Penn Jillette. Penn Jillette, who's a libertarian, has this nice way of approaching difficult issues like this. He says, is there a way we can solve this? We can solve this issue by increasing freedom, because that's his thing, rather than reducing it. Okay. Now, what he's doing there is he's putting two people on the same side of an issue. He's not putting up an ideology that can be attacked from another one. He's inviting someone to go in a direction that pretty much we all can go. Whatever our political views, we all want more freedom rather than less. We all want less poverty rather than more. We all want more justice rather than less. So it's about, and this really, you asked me about passion. If you can reframe the thing you're passionate about in this way, and it just takes, sitting down quietly for a moment to do it, then your passion doesn't become like a force in opposition to the passion of the person on the other side. It just becomes much more, it becomes necessarily constructive, right? Another thing to do is just to start by affirming the good intentions of the person you're talking to. All the time, there's a reason I talked about, your friends on the right think your friends on the left are stupid, and the friends on the left think the people on, your conservative friends or whatever are bad, right? Because that speaks to the need to not impugn the integrity or the intelligence of the person you're speaking to. And you go, well, yeah, Robin, that's obvious. Of course you shouldn't. But it isn't, because in politics, we do it all the time. We do it all the time. Now, if you're married, if you've ever had a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or just any friend at all, that doesn't work. If you're a salesman, you know that you never insult a customer if you want to sell the customer something. And again, if you're an activist, You're engaged in sales and marketing 101, except that your product is a political idea. So there is nothing about passion that is inherent, that needs inherently to be destructive or oppositional, actually. I mean, I guess I'm almost taking issue with the question. We just have to check ourselves. You know, we just have to ask, am I coming to this to win a supporter, to win a heart and mind, or to win an argument? Because you have a choice. And with respect to you have a choice, there are 7 billion people on this planet, let's say. You could talk to any of them, and you can choose to, in the first 5 minutes, to find the point of agreement, the point of shared human experience, or to find the disagreement. And in every one of those 7 billion cases, you could find probably a disagreement in principle. So which will it be? I'm just saying, begin always by finding the common ground, the ideological common ground, or even better, the shared human experience. And this is why narrative, by the way, is so important, right? You want to change somebody's mind? Start by talking about, you know, the experience you've had with your kid at school today that might be similar to her experience if she's a mum that she's had. Yeah, talk about that. Get her to be able to go, yeah, I can understand what it feels like to be this person. That's the empathy. And if you're, so use passion to talk about experiences that you're passionate about, but that are also shared human experiences, not divisive issues.
Thank you so much, Robin. I have to stop you there. We are out of time, but that was a fantastic presentation, and appreciate so much for you coming on to AdCon 3 today. We look forward to working with you more in the future, and you take care, and thank you so much, and be well.
My pleasure. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.